Chapter 8 is all about the wonderful world of employee and supervision meetings. Um, Meetings are, in some instances, a necessary evil of the any industry. But as the chef, as the manager, you are going to be the one that's going to be in charge of some of these meetings, and you want to make sure that the meetings that you are putting together are informative, are relevant, and that it feels like the employees are getting value for the time. One of the running jokes I've always heard and said sometimes is the meeting that should have been an email. Have you ever been in a meeting where you're like, why did we all do this? Whether it's in person or now, of course, virtually, this could have been sent in an email and we wouldn't have wasted our time, type of thing. So, how many times have you said this? I know I've said it on a few occasions in my professional career. Um, you need to ask yourself when it comes to a meeting is it necessary? Is it the best way to communicate what needs to be said and done? Is the benefit of the group message greater than the cost to present that message? And can this be an informal meeting, or does it need to be a formal meeting if it is going to the fact that it does need to be a meeting of some sort? So typically, if you are having a meeting, there are four reasons or types of meetings. One is just an informational meeting. Another is problem solving meeting. A third is the brainstorming type meeting. And the last is the action meeting. So those are the four types of meetings that you typically have when it comes to if you are doing meetings with your employees. You need to determine which one of these meetings are you going to be doing, and then go back to those three questions. Is it the best way to communicate? Is the benefit better than the cost? And is it informal, or does it need to be more formal? And so why we hate meetings. So these are some of the pitfalls you should avoid when it comes to coordinating and running meetings. So first thing is the goals of the meeting are not explained well enough. When you walk into a meeting, you want to know why you spending your valuable time sitting in this office, in this conference room, whatever the case may be, when you could be doing other things that to you might be considered more important. So you want to make sure that everybody understands what the goals are of the meeting are, and it's very, very precise, and everybody's on the same page. You've had those meetings where the meeting strays from the planned topics. It happens. The topic just goes off the rails, and other things are getting talked about that wasn't part of the meeting. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, wait a minute here. This is not why we are here for this meeting. Now all of a sudden, we're talking about this thing. People not taking the meeting seriously or not being prepared for the meeting. As the coordinator, as the presenter for a meeting, please make sure you have your ducks in a row. You need to make sure you're prepared for that meeting, because people will know if you are not. Right? And again, if they're already like, why do we have to be at this meeting? And then couple it with you not prepared for this meeting, it then takes that to that next level. As an employee, please make sure that, assuming that they're having meetings for the right reasons, please try to take the meeting seriously. Hopefully there is a good reason as to why this is coming as a meeting and not as an email. And so please take that seriously when it comes to the meeting itself. Too long, that's another one. Have you ever been in a meeting that should have lasted maybe 30 minutes and it lasts 2.5 hours? As the coordinator, as the presenter for the meeting, you need to make sure you're keeping things moving and making sure you're not, to use the phrase, people aren't beating the dead horse. It's not being rehashed over and over and over again. Make sure things keep moving in a timely manner. It can be a stressor for employees. You have to attend a meeting and do all the work you normally are supposed to do. So you need to think about that when you're scheduling your meeting. Is that meeting, cutting into the prep time for your kitchen staff? and they're like, oh my God, I got to sit in this meeting. And then I still got to do the prep that I normally do, but I have 45 minutes less than I normally would have to get it done. So, think about that when it comes to scheduling meetings. The same people are dominating the meeting. If you have the same people that are constantly the ones talking and really not allowing others to speak, it affects the interaction of others. If people don't feel comfortable with the interaction, they're not going to speak. It's just human nature. So you have to provide a resource. You have to provide that meeting space where people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings about whatever that topic may be. Information can be confusing when it's being presented. Make sure that what you're presenting is concise, to the point, and you're not talking at a level above where your intended audience is supposed to be at. But then on the flip side, you do not want to talk down to those that are in the meeting as well. So you've got to try to find where that average is and making sure you're communicating effectively to that average. Last thing is people not saying what they really think. Not the other side of it is that the presenter does not want to know, or they don't know how to encourage participation. That can be problematic. The attendees that dominate the discussion and others not feeling secure in their thoughts, like I said before, is another reason why we dislike meetings. So as that presenter, as that coordinator, there are things that you need to make sure you are doing beforehand and during the meeting to make sure that you're avoiding these topics or these areas that they dread when it comes to actually attending meetings. So again, like everything else we have with the books, there's a process, and it's a written out process that we don't necessarily think about from a written out point of view, but when you look at it, you go, okay, yeah, this is what we do first, second, third, fourth, et cetera, et cetera. And this is no different. So Exhibit 8.2, the meeting process. Of course, the first thing you got to do is plan the meeting. You got to identify the objectives, what type of meeting you're going to have, put your agenda together, the date and the schedule for it, making sure the right people are invited. And then if there's any materials that need to be sent out beforehand, make sure those all get done. Then the meeting itself, it's always a good idea to have participants sign in, just so then there is a written record that that person was there. Some people say, well, it can be in the minutes. Yes, it can be. But if you have a sign-in sheet and you have their signature, then that's a further documentation that that person was there, not that whoever is recording the minutes is just writing people's names in there randomly, even though they were not there. Of course, first you want to review the agenda, identify who is going to be taking notes, set any ground rules that need to be set. Then, of course, discuss the agenda items. Any follow-up activities need to be identified, and then evaluation of the meeting. After the meeting's done, of course, completing the assignments. So the minutes have to be written up and distributed, and then whatever people were assigned to carry out as far as different assignments, of course, needs to be taken care of. And then gathering materials to plan the next meeting, and you get that cycle that keeps going through. Of course, asking for input for those who completed the assignments, so you can add that in to the next start of the planning phase, of course, makes the most sense. So again, if you've ever planned a meeting before, you hopefully do these processes. You just don't necessarily think about it in that written format like what we have here in the exhibit. So when we talk about planning, so of course the objectives, what needs to be accomplished. And remember, like we said earlier, as why people hate them, they need to be easy to understand, and it needs to be practical. It needs to be something that the attendees can, to use the phrase, sink their teeth into, so to speak, when it comes to knowing what the objective or objectives of this meeting are. Who are you inviting? As far as your attendees, who needs to be there, and does every attendee need to be there the entire time? Sometimes if you have multiple objectives, maybe certain attendees only need to be there for certain parts of the meeting. They don't necessarily be there for the entire meeting, but you need to identify who needs to be there, who has to be there, needs to be there for the entire time, who needs to be there just for short periods of time, and then plan accordingly. Frequency, how often is the meeting held? Typically, if you're doing a shorter meeting, you focus on similar issues. You don't do this broad meeting that covers a bunch of different topics. It's ones that are very, very concise. So these shorter meetings can run a lot more effectively because you're just focusing on one area. Of course, an agenda is the list of topics covered in the meeting. Scheduling, of course, with scheduling, time and location is very, very important, especially in a restaurant setting, because it's not something that people can necessarily do off-site as far as a meeting. Maybe it has to be done in your banquet facility, or you're doing an informal meeting in the kitchen before service. You need to be conscientious about where meetings are being held and when they're being held, like I mentioned earlier, so you're not adding undue stress to your staff, because they also have prep work to do or other activities that need to be taken care of before service begins. And then, of course, with the planning, you want to make sure if you have any before meeting activities or assignments, that those are sent out in plenty of time for the attendees to actually do. So give them a few days, if possible, that they can take care of whatever the before meeting assignment or activity is. So then they're ready to go when the meeting actually happens. So sample agenda for you here. So you see it's, what is the meeting? When is it? What time is it? Where is it done? Who is the attendees? Are there any materials that need to be there? And what's the objective of the meeting? And then you can see they actually have, here are the topics we're going to talk about. Here's who's going to talk about it. And here is the time that we are going to allocate to that person for them to talk about it. So you can try to keep yourself on track. At the end, you can see the action item is something that is needing to be done after the meeting, typically before the next one. And then you can see the next when the next meeting actually is. And with this one, you notice it's a regular one because it's a weekly staff meeting. So it has it set up where it's at, what you guys are doing for that, and then whatever the agenda items for that week may be. Okay? And again, this is just a sample of a template that you can use. I mean, whatever works for your business is perfectly fine. Just as long as I try to just stay consistent with what you're using as far as your templates and everything. So people get to know, here's the style as far as the setup and everything is concerned, as far as the agenda, the minutes, things along those lines. So, so for conducting meetings, of course, being a facilitator is the key. Your job as a facilitator is to keep the meeting focused and moving forward in all ways that you possibly can. Page 220 has some really good tips for successful meetings. Take a few moments and look at those tips on your own time, or pause this and take a look at the tips on page 220 in the book. It gives you some really good insight as far as some things you can do as a facilitator to help keep an effective meeting moving forward and making people feel that, hey, this was actually worth the time that comes along with it. Sometimes, depending on the type of meeting you have, you might find warm-up activities, either to help focus the group at the task at hand. It can be something as simple as introductions. It can be appreciation moments, as things are going on. It could be a competitive type of warm-up activity, like a task of some sort, or it could be a team building activity or some of those things. If you're doing a longer meeting, sometimes they're nice to have. If you're doing that quick 30-minute meeting, a warm-up activity is not necessarily something that makes sense. especially if you are in a meeting with people that you see every day. Sometimes you get people that are like, well, why are we taking the time to do this? We already know each other. We need to just get the information and keep moving forward. So they can be a good thing depending on who your group is that you're working with for this meeting, but you need to determine whether or not it's an effective use of time for your meeting that you're putting together. The ground rules. So at the beginning is one of the first things you do after introductions, the basis. But what's the role of the facilitator? So if you, as you are the facilitator, are you the person that's leading it? Are you the person that just are you sitting back and letting it be kind of a more grassroots from the ground up? What's your role as the person that's put this meeting together? Of course, reviewing the agenda so people know what to expect and so they're ready to go when it comes their time potentially. And what expectations are of the meeting and of the participants. What do you expect from them? When you're managing this meeting, you need to make sure you're presenting the agenda in the order listed and address those action icons and assign people to any of those action items and do it right then and there. Don't wait to do it, but definitely keep things in order that's listed, because if you're jumping around, again, it can get confusing to people. And it just seems like a lot more streamlined if you keep it in the order that you originally have. So that comes back to the planning, that make sure you're doing it in the order that you want it to, so you're not bouncing around from thing to thing. Minutes do not have to be detailed. They don't have to have every single point of what every person said. They need to concentrate on the major issues that are in the meeting and of course the decisions that were made within the meeting. But it doesn't have to have, well, so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said that, and so-and-so said this. You could keep it as discussion was had on XYZ issue. After discussion, it was, decided that blah, 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 blah. And so you can paraphrase with minutes. They don't have to be exact word for word verbatim as far as what everybody is saying when it comes to meetings like this. And then the end, of course, with closing, you want to make sure you review the action items so everybody understands what their responsibilities are after this meeting and expectations of what they need before the next meeting. Of course, summarizing the meeting for the group as far as what was talked about, what decisions were made, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, in the end, make sure you thank everybody for their time and for their participation in it. Best way that we can figure out how things are going is through follow-up and through evaluation. And so it's really important to get feedback. Getting feedback is how we improve ourselves as professionals. It's just like, if me giving you feedback in your labs and things that you're doing well and what can be done better, giving that feedback and that evaluation is working to help you better yourselves as professionals. When you get the student evaluation of faculty, or at the end of this class, I'm going to have an evaluation. I'm going to ask you to fill out an anonymous evaluation about this class and things that I can do to improve the class, or things that you like, et cetera, et cetera. That's how we improve ourselves as professionals. Now, with things that can be written or they can be oral, whichever one works out best. But looking for that feedback. And if you are asked to give feedback, be honest on your feedback, but make sure it's constructive. Like, this meeting sucked. That's not feedback. That's not constructive feedback. But a feedback in the fact of, the meeting seemed to bounce from topic to topic instead of staying on course, or the presenter had a tough time keeping people on track with what the agenda was. Looking at actual concrete ways that the presenter can improve the meeting, or that the meeting can be improved in general, is ways that it can be presented to help that person in what they do in the future. Now, and of course, if it's good things, it was a great meeting, really liked the process. It was, short, sweet, to the point, those type of things. Those are good too. But just be thinking about how you address any type of feedback. But please, give your feedback. We put the feedback out there not just because, we want, we just, do it willy nilly. We do use the feedback. If there's a feedback after a meeting, please give an evaluation or feedback because the presenter wants to know what did they do well, what they can improve upon. Right? And again, be constructive in your criticism, and then you'll let them know the things you enjoyed as well. Um, as far as minutes, if you're able to, try to distribute them within a day or two of the meeting, especially when you have meetings that are weekly or on a more frequent basis. You don't want to wait 2 weeks before you send minutes, and you've already had two meetings between then and the time you sent out those minutes from a couple weeks ago. Right. So we just need to make sure they're going out in a timely manner. So, meetings, it's a short chapter. It's pretty concise and to the point, which, right, is how meetings should be, right? But again, it's something that as a manager, you are going to be doing during your time. And you want to make sure that you're working on improving how you manage meetings to make sure that your employees get the best bang for their buck and that you are getting the best use of the time for your employees and for yourself and that information that you might